Good luck with that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the promenades then, and how the pieces go throughout the entire pictures at an exhibition, and each one's a little different but based on the same things. So what did you decide to do with the artwork?
Well, the first thing I did was I thought about whether I could come up with an abstract way to express promenade. And I started out with a lot of realistic ideas, thinking of things like cloisters and things like that. That's a word I don't pronounce too well. Anyway, cloisters. Cloisters. All right. But anyway, what I did eventually was I started thinking in terms of the archways and the steps as if they were rooms in a gallery, and you could see little hints of pictures in there. And then I started trying to think about what would work for the figure of the composer, because I really did want that, but this was all very abstract. And so what I ended up with, I kept making little sketches of possible composer pictures and little pictures and what have you. What I ended up with was a fermata, which is, shaped like an eye. It's the composer looking at the paintings, and it's a pause. He stops and thinks about them. And that seemed to me to set the theme.
And I think it's perfect because you want to wait and see what's coming. One of the great things about all of the promenades in the music is that sometimes it reflects the piece or the painting that came before, and sometimes he gives us harmonically or in terms of register or timbre a little hint of the painting that's going to come.
Exactly. And that's where the colors came in, because the colors express a lot of the mood of the music that's around it. The pictures each are defined by a mood, and sometimes the promenade does reflect the pictures that come before. Very often it's the pictures that come after. And so, you think of them almost as framing the scenes.
I think it's important to talk a little bit about the framing of all of the paintings and where that came from.
That was an interesting concept. I had just in the year or two before I had started this project, I had been commissioned to do 2 very large icons for a church. And I'm sorry to admit that I honestly at that time had no familiarity at all with icons, so I started studying icons a great deal. And one of the things that icons use are frames. And one of the interesting things in icons, even as old as they are, is that very often the halos or the hands of the subject of the icon break the frame. Mm-hmm. And that I found to be a very dynamic idea. The idea of breaking out of the picture frame brings the subject closer. So I used it in this all the time, and I use it in most of my paintings now. It finishes the painting off very beautifully. It adds a color coordinating thing, but it also it adds a certain dynamism.
Well, it does, and it adds action in it. One of the movements that we see that the most in is the gnome, and that is also very figurative. I mean, it kind of set the stage for how you formed the rest of the paintings and the characters.
I played around with the gnome, all kinds of images for a gnome, and I think I even tried at one point grasshoppers because of the hop, 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 hop that goes on with the gnome, and perhaps it's that I've done a lot of children's book illustration or something. I thought, well, but the gnome is somewhat more sinister than you would want in a children's book, I think. And
not those original gnomes, right? In that coffee table book that all wear the red caps and the white beards.
No, these guys are pretty sinister, which is what the music is. And the idea of them sort of hopping, or jumping out of a cave and creeping up on you. I think originally I didn't have shadows in there, and we talked about adding some more pictures in, and I decided to add the shadows, which kind of give you another fairly sinister, creepy element to it, but and the gnomes I think are pretty creepy looking.
Talked about the castle.
Yeah, let's talk about
the texture in the paintings.
It's really most pronounced in the castle, and that was the painting. When I got to that, everything had been fairly flat until then, and I got so interested and excited over doing the textures, which are done by soaking muslin and linen and adhering it underneath the gesso before you start the painting. I actually went back and did the first promenade over again to add texture to it because it was quite flat, and the texture then became an integral part of the whole look of the set of paintings.
Well, and you had told me just last night, I think it was the first time you had said it, that acrylic paint, one of the things that you don't like about it is that it comes out so flat on the canvas, unlike oil, which you can make texture with.
Yeah, acrylic needs to be textured in order to give it any kind of body at all. Otherwise, it is just an absolutely, it's like wall paint, which is a horrible thing to say, but that is actually what it's like. So I always texture my acrylics now. But that was the painting that actually convinced me
to do it all the way through. And then the other thing to talk about in the old castle is the image of the dancing girl, which may be a little bit difficult for some people to understand, because we know that the painting is about an old castle, and we know that it's about a troubadour singing in front of it, and what on earth is the dancing girl doing there? And that came entirely, actually not from me, but from my teacher, Adele Marcus, who in the course of a 10-hour lesson on Mussorgsky pictures said that I needed to imagine in the old castle that there was a pasha with his harem of dancing girls.
Yes.
And absolutely clear that is not at all what this piece is about, but man, has that stuck in my mind ever since.
It's a very non-traditional interpretation.
And so I said, we must have a dancing girl in the.
And so I decided to put her in the window.
Yeah.
It's suggested in the big picture, and then we had a close-up that echoes and actually shows the dancing girl in there.
Which is where the dancing girl in the castle comes from.
Yeah.
And that's one of my favorite paintings. It's the one that carries so well for publicity, images, and that sort of thing.
The old castle, yeah.
The movement Tuileries is also called Children Quarreling at Play. And I always talk about in concert how you can hear the children taunting each other at the beginning, like children do in playgrounds all over the world. Nya, 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 nya. And then you turned it into this whole story of the children and what's happening.
And one set of children is, and who are all painted in the same set of colors, are all, obviously shouting at another set of children who are painted in different colors, and they're all very stylized. They're not realistic at all, but they are. You can tell they're like two gangs of kids.
Right.
And then in the midst of all of this, which you hear in the music, suddenly there's the peaceful child who isn't involved at all, and he's picking a flower or touching a flower, whatever he's doing with, but he's this little child, and he doesn't look at all like the other children. And then finally, after all the shouting back and forth and the arguing, the two gangs of kids come together and they hold up the flowers between them, so it ties the whole set of themes together. I thought that was a fun one to paint. I love the colors in that. It was brilliantly.
Oh, it's a great story.
High color, but I love that. No, we didn't talk about Bydło, and that was one that I went back and added all kinds of extra paintings in because it's so long and repetitive.
But it was also, I don't think I really understood what the Polish Oxcart was about until you started working on the paintings and explaining them. And I don't know why I had in my mind this picture of those kind of big decorated ox carts that you see.
Gypsy.
And I could never quite figure out. The music didn't really go with that idea at all. I mean, I could hear the ox, moving, but I didn't understand why it was such a dark piece. And then your research turned up really what finally made sense.
Well, what was interesting about that is that I actually went back to the original Hartmann drawing, and I realized that what the Hartmann drawing incorporated in there was the idea of a gallows, and I believe they were Polish prisoners or something. It was something that was going on at the time in Russian history.
Work camps, I think, maybe.
Yes, and it was very, very dark and very just very ominous. Which explains the ominous quality of the encroaching ox cart and the sort of business of the oxes trudging,
right?
And all.
Well, that the cart is taking the bodies
away. Yeah, so. And that was strictly in researching. We did use the original Hartmann pictures, which were incredibly dull, and
well, that's why we had to do this project.
Yes, that's right. But the Hartmann picture actually had some historic background
to it
that wouldn't have come up in any of your musical research.
And then you weren't very happy when we put the first film together and said the movement is so long and there were only, I don't remember, 2 or 3 paintings for it, and you thought you had finished the whole project and you were done.
50 paintings.
Yeah, and we said we need a few more paintings for this particular movement. So.
And that's when I actually came back with the end of the rather beautiful landscape painting where the cart is going away and the skulls and everything falling out, because I had at that point I'd done so much of the other paintings, and I realized, well, goodness, this prefigures what is going to happen when we get to the one with the catacombs and everything. It really prefigured it, so it did give me a chance to go back and correct something,
fix a few things.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the paintings that have grids in them.
Sure,
that's an interesting thing for me. That's a technique that I developed over the years for abstracting images. I have always been an extremely realistic artist, and so when I began trying to abstract paintings or trying to develop abstract images of things, I would often divide my paper into a grid, and I would start out in the upper left-hand corner with a realistic picture, and then I would just progressively grow more and more abstract until I finally came up with something that pleased me. And so the grid, that was my original tendency to use a grid.
Well, so you used it for the Ballet of the Unhatched Chicks, and of course the original drawings for that were a costume design for a ballet, and it just shows the man in a
little chick hat and a dress,
and his legs are sticking out.
And so I thought, well, that was a perfect one for a grid because it would give me a chance to put in lots of images that would suggest the movement of the ballet, and the progression of the idea, which I assumed was the chicks breaking out of the eggs, and ultimately in the final little grid picture they were chasing each other around, and jumping around inside the grid and out of the grid and what have you. And I really I thought it expressed the movement very well. The multiple images in a small format.
And then the other grid painting is Limoges, which is, of course, the big marketplace. But then the subtitle of it is about all of the gossip that's happening in the market.
Yeah.
And you said you had a specific inspiration for that.
Oh yeah. That came from the famous. I immediately, when I saw the word gossip, I thought of the famous Norman Rockwell cover of the people on the telephone, gossiping one after the other. And that was my inspiration. And I just did a really large grid, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do all these stylized faces. I had such a wonderful time doing all the stylizations. Some of them are realistic, some of them are hardly realistic at all, and they all are interacting, and they're all talking to each other, and their hands are moving and their mouths are moving, and it was all done on one large canvas. So and the grid that made the grid was the perfect thing to do it with.
And you can hear all of that in the music and the little interjections and the things coming back and forth.
Yeah.
The catacomb movement is based on a sketch that Hartman did of himself in the Paris catacombs, looking at all of the skulls. And in the piece, it's just some very empty chords, very kind of hollow chords. What did you think about as you put together the painting for it? Because there's so many different images in there.
I really, the darkness and the glow of the light, which I believe, if I recall, the image of the Hartman drawing, he's actually silhouetted against the light glowing from within the catacombs. I did get, I've never been to the Paris catacombs, but I did get several pictures of them, and they really are piles and piles of bones and skulls, as catacombs tend to be. And this was a motif that had occurred earlier
in Bydło.
In Bydło. Right. It also occurs in the promenade that follows this. The skulls were, once again, it was really interesting to paint. And if you look carefully at the painting, they're really only suggested. I tried to suggest the piles of bones in the catacombs and the depressing quality, and then you have the glowing light on the one side of it, and where Hartman had his own silhouette in there, I created the silhouette of Baba-Yaga, because Baba-Yaga is coming, and Baba-Yaga is sort of drawing you into the catacombs. So that's why Baba-Yaga is in the painting.
And then the next movement is called With the Dead in a Dead Language, but it's actually a promenade movement. Right. And you're moving on from thinking about this painting of the catacombs and Hartman standing in front of it, and you're about to move into Baba-Yaga, and so it connects the two of them.
And it also,
that's where the skulls came in with the arches
and also the coloring of it. It lightens up a great deal,
out,
and which sort of also leads you into the movement that follows Baba-Yaga, the movement of the final Great Gate, and so it was an interesting bridging promenade, and honestly, I didn't even realize it was a promenade until you told me when you explained the entire structure, because I'd heard you play it for years, but we did sit down and spend a couple of hours just going over movement by movement by movement on it, and I hadn't even realized there were that many promenades. So
let's start with who is Baba-Yaga, and what is the hut on hen's legs, and where that inspiration came from.
Okay, Baba-Yaga, of course, is the famous witch of Russian folklore, and she lives in a hut on hen's feet, which was based in the Hartman pictures on a clock.
Right.
A very strange-looking clock, and you can almost think of it as a cuckoo clock. So there's a look of that about
with a witch that comes out every hour. How lovely.
And the witch swoops around, and there are skulls on posts that are surrounding the hut. It's a very elaborate myth,
And she flies in a mortar and pestle.
Yeah, mortar and pestle. She flies around and snatches up victims, and you hear throughout the movement, you hear their screams. Right. Actually, that's very much a recurrent motif in the movement, and it just so that was where all the action in that came from. But the image of Baba-Yaga was came from one of my recurrent childhood nightmares, where Baba-Yaga, which I didn't know. I didn't know anything about Baba-Yaga, but a recurrent childhood nightmare where a dark figure with a sort of bird-like white face would come gliding across a room, holding its hand out, holding its white finger out, and as it held the white finger out, the person it touched would die. And it was a recurrent nightmare. Don't ask about my psychology. But there it was. And that was the image that suggested Baba-Yaga to me. That's where the image came from. It really is right out of my own childhood. So.
You said there were some other images, some other influences by other artists.
There was a little bit of the face sort of reminded me of some of the sort of horrible faces that de Kooning used to put on his women. I won't say anymore. It just it has that look about it. It's not a nice lady.
No. And then, of course, at the end of that movement, we see her flying right into
that was the one I think was so hard for you to coordinate in performance. Is that swooping up to the Great Gate of Kiev, and then it just the floodgates open. She swoops up in her mortar and pestle, and that's what I did try to create in that last picture of that movement. And as the gates fly open, you see the golden domes of Kiev, which it was known as the city of the golden domes. And so what I tried to do was create an image of the golden domes of Kiev and her pointing at it, which kind of goes back to the same pointing that went on in the Catacombs.
In the Catacombs.
That was Baba-Yaga as well.
Right. And pointing to the cross, which we see later.
And the skulls and everything else, which the skulls are very much a motif. They were fun to paint, I must say. I like painting skulls. When we were doing the Great Gate, the imagery I used was based on what you had told me that was actually going on in there.
So the three main motives in the Great Gate of Kiev are, of course, the onion domes, which we hear in the big chords and just kind of the arch-like different shapes in the piece. Bells all over the place, very clearly that you hear.
Very clear.
And then there are these two chorale sections that are supposed to be the monks singing, because, of course, Kiev was the city of churches.
Which I would not have known if you had not told me that. And that actually was very interesting to research, because I actually went out and got black and white photographs off the internet of various Russian monks chanting and what have you, and then highly stylized them to make only one picture. But in the film, what's lovely is that the picture, the different images in the picture are used repeatedly, and I thought it really did suggest monks in a Byzantine sort of cathedral, and also the Byzantine cross in the middle of it, which is a recurrent motif in this, because we are reaching the transcendent point.
And the final image and the apotheosis of the entire piece.
Yeah, it is. It is the final transcendence, I think, of Hartmann. This is, after all, this entire piece was designed to be a tribute to Victor Hartmann. And so at the end of it, after all the darkness and the almost violence of the previous movements, you suddenly have this beautiful religious transcendent movement, and the images of the monks. I did not realize that that's but I believe it says that in the score that you are supposed to
It doesn't
use.
actually.
All right, then it doesn't. Then I won't say that.
Don't say that.
We'll leave that one out. Cut. Anyway, but it really the monks actually, I think, add a certain solemn note. They pull you back to some of the imagery before, and then as well they lead into the fact that these onion domes actually are all churches, and which is where the bells come in. And I did have fun painting the bells. There's so many bells at the end of this. There's so much, bum, 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 bum.
They're
back
pretty
and
fun
forth.
to play too.
Yeah, and I just thought, oh, let's paint lots of interesting bells, and so I created several paintings of bells, and they just recur throughout the whole thing. I really did love that, and then I love the final image. The final image is just. So peaceful, and so it's got sort of a glorious look to it. The gold and the clouds in the sky and the beautiful Byzantine cross at the top.
I have to confess that very often when I play this with the film, next to me, and when I look up at the end and I see that image there, there have been a few times that I've had tears in my eyes. Yeah. So it's really special.
I can understand.
Yeah.
When I've heard you play it, I've had tears in my eyes, but that's because I'm your mother.
That's it.
There was so much with archway, bell, fermata, and you probably noticed that with each subsequent promenade, I made the archway more like a bell,
which I thought was brilliant. It was not something I actually thought of, but it just, oh, that's great. It just, I felt like we were collaborating with you.
I felt that way too, even though I was after the fact. Another thing that made me think of the bells was the promenade where the archways were angled.
Right.
And it's like, oh, that's a clanging bell.
I think that came up because when we discussed this originally, she went through the entire piece. We went through it, movement by movement, and that particular promenade, she wanted it to seem. I believe it was a little agitated and disorganized. That was the theme, and I had taken very elaborate notes on this so that I could remember all of this while I was painting it over 2.5 years. But it was really a help, and I actually did them in order. Although then we went back in and filled in with some, but the paintings were done, almost chronologically. You could call it. So it was.
And that's how I did it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just unfolds in front of you, and that's, for me, it worked really well for painting it, for taking on a project this big.
What I loved about you working on it chronologically and how the piece lays out is that it really is a dark piece, and it doesn't start that way, and you don't hear all of those elements.
Yes.
But as each piece goes on, you start hearing the darkness that's in it, which came out then in the paintings, right? Yeah. When we start with the skulls and the bones, in the Oxcart
starts out a little dark,
and things.
That's
start really
the hints
moving.
of the dark. Yeah. But honestly, I felt the theme of the whole thing is transcendence, because you reach the end and it's glorious. The music is, and I tried to make the paintings as glorious as they could possibly be.
Yeah.
But I thought was, I had a big sign in my studio that said transcendence while I was working.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that. I need a sign in my studio.
Right.